I'll give it 1 more minute for people to just sign in, and do appreciate that obviously people suddenly get client call-ins, or you might suddenly get a client call and you might need to dash. So please don't worry, it is being recorded, and you can obviously follow up at a later time if you need to. Okay, then I think we'll probably start getting underway with everything. So obviously, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this. We're going to be talking about protection insurance, underwriting, how to simplify it, make it as hopefully as easy for you as possible, trying to just give you some tips as to what to do and where to try and save time, be a bit more efficient. This is being recorded, so you are welcome to speak. You are welcome to put messages in, but just bear in mind that it is being recorded. It will go out on sort of like the systems for people to watch back. So if you don't want to be sort of in that kind of a situation where maybe your face is on or you're speaking or anything, then please, feel free to contact me afterwards. And we can always chat that way. I'll just start the session as well in the chat by sending you all the link to the website. So if you go onto that website link that's in the chat, it gives you the access there to the CPD for this session, and also for the podcast if you listen to any of my podcasts as well. So there we go. That's probably about the main thing of introductions. Lee, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Catherine. Sorry, everyone, my voice is a bit croaky today. This is the latest in the series. Octo, really pleased to be involved. We've got a real thing for protection, and we love doing these sessions with Catherine. And we also sponsor the Practical Protection podcast. So I have the easy job really today. I just look out for questions. If you don't want to come on screen and ask your questions, do feed them into the chat. I'll keep an eye out there and I'll feed them through to Catherine if you don't want to come up on screen. No compulsion to do so. But listen, thanks everyone for joining. I will go off screen now to leave everything for Catherine, but I'll come back on when Catherine begins to wrap up and take questions. But it's a big encouragement for questions. And of course, if you enjoy today and if you're a repeat visitor, so to speak, do feel free to tell all your colleagues. This is such a great resource. So over to you, Catherine.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lee. So yeah, we're going to be going through everything. For anybody who has attended these before, I am a talker. So we are going to be here for, as I say, about 45 minutes. I'll probably be going for the majority of that. So do feel free to post any questions that you want to along the way. Lee can always potentially interrupt me as I go along and answer anything. But hopefully I'll be done in a little bit of time for you to ask some questions. So essentially today we are looking at protection insurance underwriting, and I'm going to tell you what I do, as I'm just purely a protection insurance broker. I don't do any of the other things, don't do pensions, investments, mortgages, anything like that. And one of the reasons being is that one, I'm too busy to do anything else. But there is so much to do if you're going to the protection insurance side of things, and do it, really right for your clients as well, because there are so many different options in terms of products, in terms of approaches by insurers, in terms of the underwriting and the risks. It's quite unusual, I think, to come across people where there's not some kind of risk at all that will have an influence or potential influence on a protection insurance application. So I'll tell you what we do at Cura. Cura is my insurance brokerage. So for ourselves, we actually don't do any options for our clients until we've done kind of like a little tele interview first. And I don't want that to scare everybody, because when I mention this to people at times, like, oh god, kind of thing, how am I going to fit that into my own fact find and how that works and everything. It doesn't necessarily need to be intense what you start from. And the reason that we say that we won't do that, and it's just quite simple. If somebody comes to us and says, well, can I get a price right now on the phone, then we say no. Because just in the sense of, if you were doing a pension, if you were doing an investment, obviously, yes, you can state your fees and things like that, but you wouldn't be able to give the exact option that client is going to have. You're going to need to take time to prepare and look at the market, look at the different options in front of you. That's exactly the same for us in protection. At Cura, we're using, I think it's over 35 insurers for protection insurance options, all doing something slightly different for clients and in terms of the risks that they might have. You don't have to be as thorough as we do, because I say we as advisors are kind of, we're trained as insurance professionals, obviously, but I also train everybody to be kind of mini underwriters. So you can't, in a sense, be an advisor in my firm unless you have a good amount of risk knowledge as well. You must do that, because That's essentially our client base. Obviously, I wouldn't expect you guys to be in that exact same position. But you can waste a lot of time if you don't ask certain things from the start. So what I would say is, if you're speaking to somebody, if you're going to be looking at protection insurance, so if you're doing a mortgage, I get asked this quite a bit, I'm a mortgage professional, how do I bring in the protection insurance conversation? Now, this is partly my personality, but I do think it's a good way to do it as well. It's just basically say to your client, I'm setting you up a mortgage. We are discussing life insurance at the very least. You know, there's no, we're not messing about at all. It isn't like, oh, this is something that you might do as an extra. Obviously, I know that not everybody needs life insurance, but let's just assume that we're talking about obviously the significant majority of people who would need life insurance in that situation. And we just say, it is happening. I am doing it. It's part of my process. If I don't do this for you, I'm leaving you at risk, which is not what I'm prepared to do. It all comes down to your consumer duty side of things as well. But when you're doing that, obviously, we're going to be saying to them, this is happening from the start. And either you do it or you signpost to someone else who's going to come in and do it from the start for you. But we're just asking us some simple questions. We don't need to do a full application. So we're going to say to people, have you had any medical conditions in the past or now? You know, anything, any outstanding tests? That brings a lot of things together. And it's, you're not doing a full application. We might still miss things at that point. Obviously, for myself and my firm, we'd be asking a lot more than this. But for you guys, if it's not something that you're doing just day in, day out on protection side, and you're worried about how to bring this into your fact find, just ask that, get that information, find out the condition. Obviously, I would then suggest that really to do the really good options for your clients, you would ask a lot more about potential medical conditions, but at least, at the very least, if you've got it at the start, then that's the good thing. So a really good one is to sort of say to people, so any medical conditions in the past, like have you had cancer, heart attack, stroke, anything now, you know, any outstanding tests, you know, and bring in the cancer, because it might sound strange to some, and I spot a lot of people who've had cancer or who actively have cancer, but people can actually compartmentalize that they've had cancer and they might actually forget. And until you start going through those insurance application with them, they might suddenly go, oh, yeah, I did have cancer. It might be that they had a very, very small skin cancer, and it's just kind of gone out of their mind as well. It's been something that's been over and done with so super quick that it's not actually been, in a sense, that really intense side of things with cancer where they've had the really significant treatment. If you do ask people about this as well, obviously smoker status always comes up in protection insurance. You're usually about double the price if you are a smoker. That includes any form of nicotine, e-cigarette, gum, patches, anything like that. Then what we're going to do is change our fact find. So instead of saying, have you used any form of nicotine instead of, have you used any form of cigarettes in the last 12 months, which is what a lot of people tend to ask, is we're going to say, have you used any form of nicotine in the last 5 years? Excuse my cockapoo who's just having a moment in the background there. I do apologise. And it's because what we're going to do is we're going to say nicotine, because we're going to encapsulate all those things that we might be missing if we just say cigarettes. And also we're going to say 5 years, because some insurers now, when you do your research, you will see their basic premium. But with some of them, when you start doing the application, they'll say, well, have you used any form of nicotine in the last 5 years? Well, when did you? And actually, if the person gave up 2 years ago, 3, 4 years ago, they're going to rate the premium. So actually what you're going to see from the start isn't going to be the outcome at the end. So you do really need to be conscious of that. And I do suggest when you're doing your research, when you're building things, to start building up. I'm going to talk about a G sheet in a bit, and include in there which insurers are going to increase the price if they have used any form of nicotine in the last 5 years, because that could be something that comes into your recommendation as well. But then obviously you're going to check their occupation. Everybody here, no matter what kind of thing you're doing, you're going to want the person's occupation. Obviously they might be retired, which doesn't obviously fall into it. But in terms of occupation, so just what do you do for a living? The main things we're looking out for is, are they doing a job where they're potentially going to be working at heights, underground, underwater, offshore, abroad is a really big one as well. How long would they maybe be outside the UK? Things like that. So not as intense necessarily on the occupation side. And I will go through each of these ones more, but I'm just saying, so at the beginning, any medical conditions in the past, anything now, what do you do for a living? In terms of travel, are you outside the UK for say 30 days or more for holiday, more than a week for work? It's just one question. It'll quickly let you know things. Obviously, if people are traveling to certain locations, if the Foreign Commonwealth Office says not to travel there, then that can be an issue, and insurers do react to that quite quickly. A lot of you have probably seen these insurances that now, if you're traveling obviously to Ukraine, that's going to be potentially, well, not potentially, it will be an issue. Even if somebody spent a significant amount of time in the Ukraine or Russia or some other locations in the last, in the last couple of years, that can in itself cause issues, even if they're not intending to go back. So just ask that question. And the last one is sports. And it's really interesting and fun with sports, because you either get people who don't do any of the high risk sports and go, I'm so boring. And you're like, no, you're not boring. You're being safe. That's fine. And it's either that, or you get people at the other end who do everything and don't see any of it as risky at all. So I say to people early on, are you doing anything like super risky on a weekend? Like, I don't know, jumping out of an airplane, riding a motorbike, horse riding. And I include those ones specifically because jumping out of an airplane does make people think, oh, we're talking about things that are actually quite risky if something goes wrong. I say motorbike because a lot of people who ride motorbikes do not see a motorbike as high risk at all. And you will find with some insurers that you'll get into the app and it'll suddenly say something about motorbikes massively changes the outcomes. Often with the sports, you're going to go into what's known as per mil ratings. So generally with health conditions, we're going to be looking at percentage increases on premiums if there's a risk. Depends on the situation. If there has been recent cancer, there could be per mils. And per mil is where they increase the premium for every £1,000 that you're taking out. So let's say if the insurer might say, right, for every £1,000 you're taking out, we're going to increase the premium by £2 across an entire year, in a sense, so whatever. If you're taking out, like £100,000 compared to £250,000, the 250 is going to be far, far more because you've got an extra, 150 of these extra £2. It's very complicated, so I do apologize. I won't go too much into the maths of it. The insurers can help you. Do check with them. And watch out as well for per mils, because some insurers, when they say per mil, you might see some that say, I don't know, like something like 8 per mil or 10 per mil. And they're doing that based upon like an annual assessment of the premium. And then you might see some who are really, really good at like 2 per mil, 3 per mil. And you're like, I want that one because 8, 10 per mil, 2, 3 per mil, definitely 2, 3 per mil. But you can sometimes then find that the ones who are looking super good compared to the rest are actually doing their assessment based upon a monthly assessment of that per mil. I know I'm going very technical jargon here, so I'm sorry for that. But just basically, if you see per mils for your clients, one of them looks super amazing, just double check, is that a monthly or is that an annual? Because if it is a monthly, then when it goes to like the full annual amount, it's probably not that much different to everybody else. So we want to be keeping a look at all of these things. Obviously, there's lots and lots going on. As I say, with sports, we're more likely to have a per mil rating, which obviously we want to avoid. So if there's some insurers, like with the motorbike, who want to know who are going to per mil it, then we want to know so that we can go to the insurers that aren't bothered about the motorbiking. And this is all mainstream insurers that I'm talking about with these differences. We're not talking about having to go super specialist or anything like that. It's just different insurers have different risk appetites, and it's knowing whereabouts to look at these things and put these things. So in terms of underwriting systems, there are some absolutely brilliant underwriting systems out there that can help you. Now, that's not necessarily, I'm not saying stop by giving you the quotations, but the underwriting, doing the online system for you, kind of centralizing all the insurers' systems for you. And they can be absolutely fantastic. They are brilliant if you have things like high BMI, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, some levels of mental health, so depression, anxiety, stress, where there's not been any kind of the really significant interventions, or there's been any kind of significant harm or anything like that for the person. So they can be really, really useful for that. They can be really good for sports and travel as well, just to give you a good idea. What I would say, though, is if you are using these kinds of systems, because I'm involved in quite a lot of social media groups, and especially on Facebook in terms of advisor things, and people put on, suggestions saying, what should I do in this situation? And somebody goes, oh, use this system. And I'm there thinking, don't use that system. The reason being is if someone's had cancer, if they've had a heart attack, if they've had a stroke, if they've got Parkinson's, those online systems are not going to give you an indication. They are going to say, you're going to go through them all and they're going to say refer for a medical report. So if you know it's going to refer for a medical report, if it is one of those situations, there's only one insurer that doesn't necessarily require a GP report for Parkinson's, but that is going direct, not through one of these online systems. and it's very, very specific circumstances. Majority of the time in those situations, you just need to speak to the underwriters. You're going to have to do that to get a really good idea as to what that person's situation is going to be, what's going to be available for them. So do play about with online systems, on the underwriting systems, find what can go through, what doesn't go through. Make a note. So I'm going to say this obviously early on, build a G sheet. So that's a Google spreadsheet. And I really suggest this for anybody who's working in this space. And it doesn't need to be fancy, but if you do it as a G sheet that you can share it with your team and you can all build in and do your answers. So you could have a tab in the G sheet that says cancer or breast cancer, let's say, and then look at your insurers. So you could have the insurers in the rows in the sense that you use, and in the columns, you could have life, kick, IP, and then write in what they did. So, oh, well, I had somebody with breast cancer and, let's say, I don't know, let's say Aviva for life insurance offered, I don't know, plus 50% on the premiums based upon the situation. So you could just write in there saying plus 50%, and you can say, was it a lower staging cancer, something like that. And then it'll help you later on when you're looking at the different insurers and looking at those conditions to go, right, well, actually previously that insurer said this, so they tend to be a bit better. You do want to keep an eye on it every now and then and kind of have another relook, because insurers do change their risks at times and they don't outwardly kind of come forward with that. But it will help and it will simplify. It's a little bit more at the start, but it saves so much time in the long run, because, in terms of what we do as at Cura, we do have a G sheet. Quite a lot of us use it. Some of us with certain medical conditions will just know off the top of our head, this insurer, that insurer, that's the kind of situation we're going to get. It might be standard, it might be rated, that insurer will decline for this. But if you're not doing this purely day in, day out, and specifically working with clients who do have risks, it's going to be very, very difficult to do that. So having some kind of repository where you can sort of really engage and sort of put that information in will save you a lot of time in the long run. You can find as well with these online systems, because when you look at the online systems, what they do is the underwriting systems, they have a centralized set of questions that the insurers have agreed to and given in their ratings what they will accept. So what you can find at times is that the insurers will have signed up to say, right, through this system, we agree to this question set and this is what we're going to do. But actually, if you went direct to the insurer, you can have very different outcomes to them. And some insurers won't use these online underwriting systems because they're not prepared to go to like a generic centralized set of questions, because they want to really be very specific about certain areas. So it might be that all the insurers have sort of like agreed in this centralized system, okay, we agree that we'll see this as risky, but we're going to say that we don't see this as risky. So the insurers who don't sign up to it are the ones who are probably thinking, well, actually, that bit that you're saying isn't risky to us. That, no, statistically, that is a risk. We probably don't want to completely ignore that. So do use them if it really helps you. Just bear in mind, as I say, that sometimes you might still get better options if you go direct. So they can be brilliant, absolutely fantastic, save so much time, but they're not always the answer for everything and for everyone. As a really good example of that is sports. As I say, some insurers don't see motorbikes as a risk, some don't see skiing as a risk, some don't see sailing as a risk, others will do. And, it might well be that actually you end up with a worse outcome through an online system because of the fact that the online system maybe asks about skiing and your client has to be going off-piste and doing all this fancy stuff and all, stuff that's, potentially going to get quite a high rating. But the insurer, if you'd gone direct to them, might not have asked anything about skiing. So you really do need to just be on top of where that all sits. One thing I do suggest as well is that you never give the client the basic price until you know their risks, until you've at least had a chat with them. If they say, no, absolutely nothing in my medical history, don't do any, I'll just go on holiday to Spain a couple of times a year, maybe I'll just work in an office, I'm a financial advisor, no sports, the worst thing I do is go running and maybe, cycling on the road. Somebody who's not going to seem like anything and you're thinking, brilliant, that's absolutely fantastic. We can just go straight in, do all the app and everything. That's potentially okay. But then just bear in mind as well, whilst we might do that, it might work really well. We do have the fact that we've not asked about family medical history, which can have a huge influence on critical illness cover especially. So I really do suggest that you do at least some of these questions, try and capture as much as you can, whilst also being sensible to your time and your fact finding what you can allocate to this. Just because you can really see a huge change. So somebody, you're doing an application, all of a sudden they turn around and say, well, actually, let's say as an example, they're a woman and they've had a sibling diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 42. It's quite likely that they will, with a critical illness application, have a multiple sclerosis exclusion on there. That's something you want to prepare for before you get to that decision stage, before you've done that half an hour, 45 minutes in the application, because that's probably one of the key areas of concern for that person. And if you're suddenly saying there's an exclusion, it's going to be a very negative process, and it's going to make it feel negative for everything you're suggesting to them, because you've not been able to prepare them, manage their expectations, and they can feel sort of quite downhearted by it. Some will be quite annoyed by it as well. So just really think about what you're doing in terms of, am I going to manage their expectations to the start? Is that going to end up being the right thing in the end? Because life insurance, we all know it's lovely and cheap for the majority of people. But let's say basic premium is £5 a month, you get through underwriting and it's £20 a month. I think all of us would probably think, well, £20 a month, for probably quite a lot of us is affordable. But I would really have liked that £5 a month, why aren't I getting that? And it's kind of like a little bit of a kick in the teeth, bit of a slap in the face to basically, I always say it's a bit like that whole, when there used to be that TV show, and this is the prize you could have won if you'd chosen the right door kind of thing, and there'd be this lovely, and boat or fantastic car in the background. It kind of feels like that, to sort of be like, well, actually, no, we can't have this because of this health condition, because of that. And that can really be very negative to that person and how they feel about themselves. So we're doing all of that. Obviously, we're going to be trying to build our G sheet as well, which is probably the key thing that we really want to be taking away, is that we can do stuff to help ourselves in these systems. So let's have a look at things. So if somebody had said to us about health, and I'm going to talk about mental health here, because I think that's one that's really a lot of people will come across. We have lots and lots of people that are experiencing mental health. And let's have a look at depression. Okay, so the first thing I would say when you're speaking to a client, if they do say to you, if you say to them any medical condition, just go, well, I have experienced depression in the past, thank them. Say, I'll thank you for being open with me. It is something that a lot of insurers would want to know about. Do you feel comfortable chatting to me about it? There are some quite specific questions that I would need to ask you. Is that okay? If not, we can look at options where we don't have to go through the questions, but they're not going to be as good an option in terms of like the quality of the product. Give them the choice, thank them for being open, explain that we do need to go through these things to get them the better option. A lot of people will just be pretty straightforward in the sense of depression and it going through the application set, but obviously there are some people where it's going to be a bit more tricky. But we also want to make sure that we're capturing all of the potential trickiness early on, so that we know where to go to, and again, not give any, for some people, false hope as to what might be happening. When I say false hope, let's say somebody has potentially attempted to take their life 2 weeks ago. We're not going to be getting life insurance in the mainstream insurers there. We will be able to get insurance, but it is going to exclude anything relating to any kind of self-harm or suicide attempts. And then we can also prepare them for the timeframes when we maybe can look at more mainstream, things like that. Key things with any health condition: what were you diagnosed with? When were you diagnosed with it? What medications or treatments have you needed to take? That's really important. Have they changed recently is a good one as well. So, if you've got somebody with mental health and their dosage has suddenly gone up recently, depending upon the medication, that can have quite an influence. More the stronger medications where it can potentially have an influence. And there's lots to go into this. We don't have time to go into all of this right now, but I'm just trying to give you the main things. But we're going to be saying what, when, what's the treatment, any changes recently. And also feel free to, in a sense, apologize and say something like, I'm really sorry, but the insurers will ask about these things. Is it okay if I ask you? If it gets too much, we'll just stop. That's fine too. You can always say to people, you can stop. So the insurers, as soon as we say things about depression, they are going to be saying inpatient treatment, community mental health team, psychiatrist, thoughts, self-harm attempts. It's better to know that early on, because then again, some insurers don't ask about thoughts in the same way as others. Some don't ask about self-harm or attempts if they were over 5 years ago, some are over 10 years ago, some will ask forever. So we want to make sure that we know exactly where we're going. And in that G sheet, where you've been building up these potential things, next to the mental health section, you've got an insurer in there. So say for life insurance, doesn't ask about, attempts or self-harm if it's over 5 years ago. That'll really, really help you as you're going forward. Some extra things in terms of health that can be really, really useful is, and I have this sometimes with my team, it's all about a learning experience. If somebody says to you, oh, I've got this condition and I'm absolutely fine, it doesn't bother me at all, I just carry on as usual, I work normally and all this kind of stuff, okay. And then you find out that actually they're in receipt of, personal independence payment or employee support allowance in the health side of things. That doesn't add up, unfortunately. And what we're going to do is turn around and have to very, very, very carefully be discussing the fact that, okay, so we've got this health condition, we've got this benefit here. Those benefits, especially personal independence payments, are not easy to get. They are very, very difficult to get. You do need to be quite ill. So if you're being told that the condition isn't strong, but they are in receipt of those benefits, then to get those benefits, there will have been reports from the GP. It should be in the GP records, and the GP should mirror what they've said in a sense to the, I'm trying to think of the people who do the assessment now. I can't think of it, the PIP people, to the same to the insurer, to the underwriter. So we need to be chatting about that from the start, in a sense of we're not going to be challenging them, we're not going to be funny, we're not going to be pointing out and saying, hey, up, that doesn't add up or anything like that. That's certainly not what we're going to do. But we're just going to be from the start, being very, very cautious, very sensible, very empathetic, and just say, well, obviously, with you receiving PIP, they would usually, the insurers, would be thinking that means that your health is actually quite, your symptoms are quite strong. And obviously they would want to see a report from your GP just to confirm everything. And then you would just speak to the underwriters, it could well be. And then at some point, we just need to be saying to the client, well, obviously, this is the indication based upon what you've told us, but obviously, depending upon what comes back in terms of what the information was in regards to your health when you were needing the PIP and things like that, that could really alter the options. Another thing I forgot to say in terms of the mental health is to really be careful. It's really hard because it's kind of, we don't all talk about suicide all the time, but we do hear about it on the TV, in the news, on films and everything. And it's been quite normalized for a long time to say commit suicide. We don't say commit suicide. The insurer's questions shouldn't say commit suicide. They should say attempt suicide. The reason being is that commit suicide, it goes back to when it was illegal to try to take your life, and its religious connotations to it. So it can actually be quite offensive to people in terms of religious backgrounds and things like that. So we're going to really try and change that wording as to how we're going to say it. If you do say it, you're just going to have to be a case of let's hope that the person is offended. If they are, just apologize and say that you've been really trying sort of like to improve the way that or the industry improving the way that things that we talk about these things, and it's just been an unfortunate thing that you've said it in the old version and you are sorry. It's the best thing you can do. So as I say, if we've got anything like PIP, then we know it's not as light a condition as people would be suggesting to us. You've also got as well, I would be saying, now, not everybody does this. I will do it with my clients where I say for them to see the GP report. It can delay things a couple of days or so. The reason being is the amount of errors that we see. I say my firm specifically helps people very much so in risk situations. A lot of the time it is health. We see a huge amount of errors in GP reports, and we have to get them corrected. It can also be as well that the person maybe hasn't understood a certain medical term that's been said to them, which completely changes everything. So I really suggest get them to see the report. There's two ways that's done. There's the electronic version, which is known as the IGPR. With that one, it's a bit tricky. So You have to prepare them. If it comes to you electronically, when you check it, don't just say, yes, I approve and send. There'll be somewhere on there it says download my own copy. Get them to download a copy and then say yes to send, because with the electronic system, once that button is clicked to send and the GP sends it, it's disappeared. It's completely gone in the system for the GP. It's with the insurer, and getting that back off the insurer is not simple at all. It's going to take a long time. So get them to download it. Then if anything happens that you're not expecting in terms of terms, then, obviously you can basically say to them, well, can you share a copy of that with me? I can then speak really clearly with the underwriters, because I can evidence to them to say, I've got the GP report, and they can let me know what's the outcome of this is. For myself and my firm, we would just say, just send us the GP report from the start, because then we can preempt anything that we weren't expecting. Some examples of errors. We had somebody where in their entire report, there was one line that said diabetic, didn't have diabetes, never been tested for it. There was no blood test results, but the insurer was going to increase the premium because of that one line. Luckily, we were able to get the report corrected, which meant that we were able to get the standard premiums. We then had somebody else, this is not uncommon, where they drink maybe a couple of times a year on special occasions. And actually the GP has put this person drinking 6 or 7 units a day, which massively changes the outcome. That's another one to suggest as well. I do suggest, in terms of checking, alcohol, just say, how much alcohol do you drink? When we're getting something, always ask us, I suggest asking as well, have you ever been advised to reduce? Because I've certainly been caught out by that before when I was in my early stages of advice. So a lot of my tips come from obviously tried and tested things that have happened. And again, massively changes the outcomes. Another thing to be mindful of with health is that insurers' views of medical conditions are very different to GP views. And this can come out quite specifically as an example with people who tend to be older and what's known as chronic kidney disease. So it's a very medical kind of thing, but essentially, as we get older, our kidneys don't work the same as we did when we were in our 20s. Pretty standard. So just like as we get older, insurers assume that our BMI will get a bit higher, that our cholesterol, our high blood pressure, our blood pressure will get a bit higher, and they adapt where they're going to like underwrite and rate people based on the fact of this is just what the body does as it gets older. It's not that you're poorly, it's just that you're older. But that doesn't happen with chronic kidney disease. So chronic kidney disease, a GP will say to somebody, right, this is your kidney function, all fine. Because based upon their age and everything and the medical side of things, it is seen as fine. But insurers will look at that figure and go, well, that's chronic kidney disease. And you're like, but that's based upon a 20-year-old, a 20, 30-year-old in good health with their kidneys working at that function, like, yeah, but that's chronic kidney disease. And you end up in this kind of like hitting a wall kind of situation. So sometimes with older people, we can find that there are certain things that are going to come out that the GP isn't concerned about in the slightest, but the insurers will. Another one some of you might be familiar with, I had a client who had consistently had protein in the urine. It was just something that their body was doing. And they'd seen specialists, they'd been fully checked, their body was just doing that. And their GP, their consultant just went, look, it's just one of those things for you. There's nothing else to do. We're not going to be able to correct it. It's just one of the, But to the insurers, that's a case of, well, actually, that means that something in the kidneys isn't working right. So, this is something that we're not too sure about, and we want to know a lot more. But so then again, you're in this thing of like, well, the GP and the consultant aren't going to do anymore. And the insurer's like, well, we need to know more, or else we're not going to be doing this. So it can be really tricky at times. And people can get quite frustrated that the insurance world obviously isn't working in the same way as the medical world, but that is the way that it is. We do a lot, and I am involved in a lot of changes that happen in the industry and being vocal about changes that I think need to happen. But there are sometimes certain limits as to what we can and can't do and what we can and can't change. And we obviously just all need to work to it as best as we can. I'm going to give you some examples now, and then hopefully I will actually have a few minutes for any questions. So to give you some examples of some of the other ones, occupation. I was trying to figure out what would be the good occupation for the people attending this, because I know obviously we're going to have advisors from all aspects of financial services looking at this, and I went with merchant marine because I thought merchant marine, it is potentially a bit of a risk, but they also tend to be quite wealthy. So I thought that probably fits, any financial advisors that are here and potentially the people that you'll be accessing. So merchant marine, Similar if you had fishermen or anybody else who's working on a boat, things like that. Not offshore people. Offshore people will be different. But merchant marine, where are they? Where are they traveling? Which waters are they going to? What's the size of the boat? That's really important. How often are they outside of the UK? So how much time is spent, not on UK ground each year? How big is the crew is another big thing that's important for certain ones. For merchant marine as well, what's interesting is that they can sometimes have a special tax code. So it's good to know if they have that tax code, because with a lot of these insurances, the insurer wants them to be a UK taxpayer. There are certain jobs where they're not necessarily UK taxpayers. They've got a special thing that means that they're not, but they still have the foot in the door here, which means that they can be covered. So just double check those kinds of things. In terms of travel, again, I was trying to figure out the best kind of travel to mention, because obviously we insure people for all kinds of situations. I was giving recommendations to somebody not long ago who'd be traveling to Haiti. And as we've seen probably in the news recently, Haiti is an area where there is obviously the Foreign Commonwealth Office would be a huge no for a lot of insurers for insuring there. So I've gone with Abu Dhabi. I thought, let's go against somewhere where potentially, somewhere that's not in the list of, so obviously the insurers will ask, North America, Europe, New Zealand, Australia, that kind of UK. Obviously now we're no longer part of Europe. So I was thinking, so Abu Dhabi stands out because it's not really a risky area in terms of what the insurers see at this moment. I must always say at this moment. But again, how often are they going there? Why are they going there? Is it work? Is it leisure? How many months of the year? It's quite good to know as well. If they're there quite often, is it like in 3-week bursts? Because some insurers will say, well, it's consecutive rather than sort of like if it's just lots of individual ones. And again, that thing of, are they a UK taxpayer? That's a really key thing when people are abroad quite a bit, just in general, because they want to make sure that they are here, because they want to know if they're not a UK taxpayer, then it's a case of, well, if they are more resident in another country, can they have this insurance? Now that will come down to partly what the insurer can do, what your compliance will allow you to do, and what your PI insurer will allow you to do. Because you might need to go international, which is possible. But also it's just a case of, if somebody is not resident in the UK, it's because of the fact that the underwriting risks change, and it's what are the risks for that country in terms of someone's likelihood of dying or likelihood of developing a critical illness. What's the healthcare structure there? And that's why it changes quite a lot. And then in terms of sport, so before, people doing sports don't often realize how risky their sports can be. Some insurers aren't too bothered about certain ones, some are. So I've chosen scuba diving, because scuba diving is one where a lot of people are just like, it's just scuba diving, which is fine, but there's a lot to know as well at times. So I'm just going to go through some of the things that I would be asking someone if they told me scuba diving. So I'd be saying, is it UK based? Is it abroad? Are they using mixed air? Are they doing open water? Are they more like in coves? Are they solo? Are they in a group? What qualifications do they hold? Are they wreck or cave diving? If they are doing that, do they see, always see the exit? If it's a wreck, is it an actual, a boat's been going and sunk and it's a wreck, or there are man-made wrecks, or you might have seen them sometimes on social media, like the man-made art sculptures and things that are underground, things like that. What's the max depth that they go to, and how often are they doing it? So it's not just a case of saying, oh yes, you do scuba diving. We're trying to preempt everything that's going to come out later on, so we can make sure that we have the right insurer. And again, that's where things like your G sheet, figuring out actually this insurer asked this one didn't ask this, and just helping you to build up that really quick guide as to, this is the insurer I need to go to in this situation for my clients. That is the majority of things I was going to say. Hopefully it's been helpful just to explain everything. So again, yeah, Lee, any questions? Any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. As always, really comprehensive. Excuse me. Gentle reminder, as I said on the chat, that all questions are welcome. I've got one, and this comes from my time as a financial planner. One of the frustrations that we always used to suffer with, and as you know, I'm a big believer in insurance, was GPs could take a long time to reply. Do you have any tips there for the assembled delegates? Because I'm sure everyone feels this frustration keenly.
Yeah, well, IGPR, if it's an electronic one, IGPR actually have a website, and it's brilliant. And what they do is you go on their system, and I can't remember what you type in. I think you type in the application number. I think that's it. And then and you don't put in any identifiable information except that. And then it'll come up and it'll say to you, received by the GP at this point. Based upon this GP's previous experience, we expect it to be released in 2 weeks. And obviously, with it being electronic, it's amazing the actual statistics and what they can give you. It's saved an incredible amount of time because it means as well you're not then having to chase the GP. Some GPs can be really funny. Sometimes it can be helpful to ring them and go, look, we're not being funny, but ultimately this is stopping this person from protecting their family. This isn't like us messing about, but you are literally stopping them getting this insurance. That can help sometimes. If it's a paper-based one, what I would say is what we do is, because we have specific administrators who help with this, so they will ring up and say, have you received the GP request? Yes. Have you sent an invoice to the insurer? Then you go back to the insurer, come back. Have you paid it to the GP? Right, to the GP. Have you received the payment? And obviously that's our process as to we do it. We will then keep getting in touch with them. They do, once they've received payment, there is a requirement that they return it within a certain amount of days. I believe it's 28 working days. What we have found though recently with some GPs is that they're being quite funny at times. Not all GPs, and obviously what I want to say is that I adore GPs. I've got nothing, they are incredible. They are so overworked. They are so busy. They've got hardly any resources. So doing this is intense for them as well. But we have had it with some GPs where the insurers will set an amount that they'll go, well, we're prepared to pay this for a GP report. And they'll do that. But then some GPs have said, well, actually, for that price, and we've literally had this with a go, for that price, you won't get it for 6 months. So if you want it in 3 months, you have to pay us this. In 2 months, 1 month, 1 week, you pay us this. And it's not feasible. The insurers can't do it. And the thing is that is not the insurer's fault. That is what the GP is doing. And that's then again as well, that's a really hard situation because you then get either a client who's upset with the insurer for not paying it, or you get a client who's then really upset with their primary healthcare, provider, because they're just like, why aren't you doing this for me? You're really stopping this, which is really, really sad. So the best thing you can do is keep a record. If they say they're sending it back at a certain time, contact them close to that time. Is it still going to be done in that time? Then if you are getting to the point where it's that 28-day turnaround from the point they've received payment, so it's not point of report, point of receiving payment for it, then that's when you probably want yourself or a manager to be contacting them. And then at that point, unfortunately, you do have to start saying things like, well, actually, under the the BMA guidance, you need to send this back. You're not allowed to just have been paid this and not complete this service.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question from Cassandra. Thanks, Cassandra. What do you do when a condition doesn't quite fit an application form? So if you disclose it, you're asking random, non-relevant questions on the form and having to follow up with emails. These then could be detriment to the customer with a rating or exclusion, but don't want to have a non-disclosure at point of claim.
Yeah, it's a really, really tricky one. So sometimes if it's something doesn't fall completely in the questions, then what I'd say is that the important thing as well, I have to say with these insurances is that the whole rule is if the insurer doesn't ask the question, you don't volunteer. So if you've got a health condition there that doesn't at all fit into those question sets, you don't need to tell them about it. That is the rule.
Right.
But at the same point, if someone has a medical condition, there's usually a catch-all somewhere that says, have you seen a professional in the last 3 years? Have you had any medication? And at that point, you'd say yes, and then you'd need to probably type something in. Some of them do have that facility now where you say, other or unknown. So, and then you have a free text box where you can type it in. If you really feel that it's nowhere in that application, but you are worried about non-disclosure, I would just, for your own safety as the advisor and the client security as well, I would contact your account manager. I would email them, so you've got an email trail, a record to basically say, I wouldn't necessarily say, I've done this application and I want to know where I should put this. I would say, I have a client that I'm considering putting to you, and they have this situation. Where would it go in your question set? Because if you start saying to them, oh, well, this application, they have this. And obviously don't start it. And if you don't start it, everything's fine in a sense. If you've started it, then you will need to be obviously much more vigilant. But just say to them, so where would I put this? And if they say, well, there's nowhere to fit it in our questions, actually, then you're fine. You just carry on as is. But if they say, well, actually, that condition is actually, it sits in here because of this aspect of it in the background, it makes it, I don't know, a neurological condition that we maybe, we don't necessarily know. And they'll say, so fit it in there. And then you know that obviously you've got it done the right way possible. And I did somebody a little while ago where there was something, I was like, I'm just not sure if it fits in this question set. So I did the policy and I just emailed, obviously I didn't start, I just emailed the underwriters and I said, look, what do I need to do with this? Where do I need to put it? I'm not completely sure. With your wording, it was hit and miss as to whether or not it needs to be in there. And they're like, it's fine. These are the questions we'd want to know. What are the answers? Done. And it was absolutely fine. Didn't change anything at all. But yeah, it sometimes it isn't easy to just get around it. There's some insurers, for example, where with mental health, instead of actually having the ability to put in the mental health condition, they don't actually recognize it, even though it's a very well-known mental health condition. So you have to put in mental health as the disclosure because nothing else fits. It's none of the other ones. And then you just go down the regular route of questions of, which is very, very confusing. But with those ones, I say the key thing is, because I come from a compliance background as well, you always protect your back. So if you don't think it's in there, double check with somebody. Don't just assume, don't hope. As you say, the last thing we want is anything it claims go on for the client. We also don't want a complaint against ourselves either. And if we've got that trail, then the insurer can't argue against us because we can go, well, actually, this person told me this, I've done the right thing. If you've done it wrong, you've done it wrong, and you should honour what you've done wrong. And that's hopefully the best we can do.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And Cassandra says thank you too. So I think that's us just about on time, unless there's any final questions. No, pretty quiet. So listen, thanks, Catherine, as always, fascinating. Fun enough, I'd forgotten about that whole thing about whether you did or didn't put it on the form if the question wasn't there. So that's great. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for turning up. See you for the next one, I hope. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. See you soon, everybody.